unlike other places, we don't believe kids can't do it. We don't say, oh, well, you're in high school. Let's frame that. The best part about Alpha is we rip the constraints off. All the things that normally, whether it's adults or systems or processes that tell kids they can't, we believe that kids can. Ultimately, they are limitless. They are their only limit.
Welcome to the rebelEducator podcast. In this episode, I talk to Chris Locke, the head of the high school at Alpha in Austin, Texas. We talk about how students at Alpha spend 4 years in high school building Olympic-level masterpiece projects, how students at Alpha also score 4s and 5s on their AP exams without having any teachers, and what Chris learned from his 17 years working at IMG Academy, the largest athletics-based boarding school in the country, about the parallels between preparing kids for athletic success and preparing kids for academic success. Let's dive in. Chris, I'm so excited to have you here today. You're the head of the high school at Alpha, which is one of the schools that I've had my eye on for a while now. It's a very interesting program that you guys are running. Can you give us the really quick pitch on what Alpha is?
Absolutely. Alpha, we are trying to build the best high school in the United States. That is ultimately our goal. And the way that we want to approach that is we want to disrupt education. We want to deliver academics in half the time so that our students can unlock half of the day so they can pursue a really bold, ambitious masterpiece project that we talk about where, whether it's trying to get a top 10 Substack or build the best mountain bike park or teach teenagers the values of the 10 Commandments through teen entertainment. It doesn't matter what the goal is. What matters is that we have young men and women that want to do really big, bold, ambitious things. And we want to give them the platform and the means to be able to do that.
We're going to dive into all of those specific projects in a little bit. But I want to talk more first. I want to set the foundation for Alpha because what you guys are doing is really interesting. It's pretty unique as far as alternative schools go. And you guys are still relatively new. You've been around for a while and have been slowly growing and scaling. But in the grand scheme of things, like having a high school, having kids coming through building masterpieces, graduating from high school, there's not a huge track record yet. It's still in the early experimental phases. Can you give a little bit more context? There's 3 Alpha locations right now, and it's a K through 12 school. But the high school portion that you're working on is newer, if I understand correctly. Is that true?
That is true. We're officially in year 3 of the high school. So our first graduating class will put 3 students out to colleges and universities next fall.
That's amazing.
But to answer your question, we do have 3 campuses. Austin is sort of ground zero for Alpha. We have a K through 6 campus that is just in the Liberty Park, Bee Cave area. Then the high school, as well as what we call level 3, but others would consider grades 7 and 8, is right downtown in the former La Zona Rosa building. So it's a great spot right in downtown, close to everything. And then we also have a campus K through 8 in Brownsville, Texas, so down on the coast.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but my understanding is that you guys have kind of grown up with your students. Like you started out as a school for younger kids and then added on the high school as kids got older, which I think is pretty common for schools. Like I think a lot of Acton academies start that way. I think a lot of Montessori schools kind of evolve that way. Has that been the general iteration or evolution of Alpha too?
Exactly right. So we refer to a group of our students as the OGs, the ones that started before it was Alpha, when it was Emergent Academy. And they, to your point, have not only grown up with Alpha, but more importantly, they've set the culture. They've set many of the standards. And it's really because of some of these talented students that there is a high school, because they didn't want to leave the Alpha model and go to high school anywhere else. They had already developed this sense of agency and this desire to continue a non-traditional form of education. So the high school just grew out of it. So technically, since we do have a few graduates, only one of the 3 that are going to graduate has been here, but Wyatt is one of our absolute OGs and is an absolute leader and truly embodies the Alpha spirit. He is a self-directed learner and can deliver quality academics without a teacher. And we'll talk about that a little bit more in the ways that we want to be innovative and disrupt. But yeah, we absolutely created the high school because our kids didn't want to go anywhere else.
I want to delve into that no teacher part, because some of your students are, as they're building out these masterpiece projects, which we'll get to in a second, they're very active on social media. They're active on Twitter. They're developing these very interesting personal brands. They're definitely getting a great crash course in what personal branding is and how to do it well. But they emphasize the we're in a school and we don't have teachers element. And that's such an interesting thing for people. It's a real paradigm cracker because people don't think about school, but no teachers. Like the two things are very synonymous usually. What does it mean in practice to be running a school that doesn't have teachers?
Great. And I'll do my best to answer it as clearly as possible. But basically, what it means to have no teachers is there's no direct instruction. What it doesn't mean, there is tons of learning that goes on and there is interaction with adults. We still have a staff, so they're not completely on their own. We've set up our environment to be more like a WeWork. There's no desks and rows, there's no classrooms, but there are opportunities not only for peers to interact with each other, but certainly to interact with our staff. We refer to ourselves as guides, and we see our primary role as guides to motivate, to encourage, to help students problem solve and be a truly self-directed learner. But we don't also want them to get completely stuck. If they get stuck, we'll encourage them and we'll ask them great questions to help them get unstuck, because often they know the answer. Sometimes it's just they might need to be reminded of some of the steps. But ultimately, if they need some guidance, we're here to do that. But we really see ourselves as motivators and adult support. The way we teach, or the way Alpha students learn, is through adaptive software. And we have a full data team that we track everything that our students do within the software. And then we have one staff member that is constantly trying to stay ahead of what is the latest software out there. How can we continue to deliver a better quality education? And we take tons of feedback from our students in terms of what do they like, what do they not like about the apps and the software that they're learning from. But more importantly, and I will keep hitting this theme over and over again because we are such proponents of self-directed learners. We want the students to be able to find any resources. So as we started the year, we put everybody, whether they were new or returning, in what we call the boot camp. And it had different kind of tests to pass that they needed to get through in order to graduate boot camp. But one of the key components was we wanted students to learn Boolean or advanced search terms so they can find anything they need, whether it's in Google or on YouTube, and some are finding resources on Twitter. So we gave them these skills because ultimately, I've worked with great educators. I've had 20 plus years in education, but I can tell you that there is no one single educator that can be as effective as the internet can. There is someone that can explain it better, that's done a better job. And if we can teach students to be able to go out and find those resources, we've now given them the tools that they can learn anything. I mean, my own son learned woodworking on YouTube, and it's amazing that you would think that you can learn from that media, but far better than me or his grandfather to teach them. So we believe that the students can find anything there. We just sometimes have to give them the tools. And again, part of learning and what is a great teacher, and I've seen it on some of your threads, great teachers inspire students. Great teachers motivate students. Great teachers don't have to spoon feed information and have students regurgitate them. Great teachers encourage kids to think bigger, to be naturally questioning, and to actually love learning and learning how to truly learn. And that's the goal of Alpha, is to give our students the keys to doing that. But unlike some of the other programs, and Acton is an absolutely fantastic program that is very much student-centered, no formal teaching, we still do teach Common Core. We take exams, we take the SAT, the ACT, we have our high school students take CBEs, credit by examination, through UT High School, because we also still believe that our students need to be able to, make certain tests to pass certain professional hurdles, and be prepared to be successful if they pursue, a selective college or ultimately want to go to law school or be a doctor. So we don't want to take away the testing angle. We don't put all of our stock in it, but we don't avoid it either.
The comment that you just made about the internet teaching students better than teachers is extraordinarily controversial. And I knew it was controversial always, but I've been surprised by the level of pushback that I get via rebelEducator when I talk about that. People really dislike that point, and people have a lot of strong opinions about it. And you're running a high school that is implementing this in practice. Kids are learning off of the internet and they're thriving too, which we'll get to in a second. But I want to hear you delve a little bit more into the argument for that, because a lot of people
Sure.
really hate it. They think the internet's really impersonal, and they think that kids need more one-on-one direct instruction. They think that the teacher in front of a classroom model has existed for hundreds of years for a reason, because it's the best way to do it. What's your argument for the internet being a better teacher than actual in-person teachers?
The best argument I have is the data. The data that we have says that kids don't need a teacher. When you look at test scores, I'll give you an example. At my last school, I was at a big boarding school in Florida, IMG Academy, great program. I have nothing but good things to say about it. But if I had a student that wanted to take AP biology, for example, they would have taken honors biology as a freshman, honors chemistry as a sophomore. We would have encouraged them to take honors anatomy and physiology. And then when they were a senior, now we think you're ready to take AP bio. I had 2 students last year that were freshmen that took AP Bio and made 4s without a teacher, but with great software, with great peer support, and with guide motivation. We certainly utilized a lot of the different resources that were out there. But to me, that is just proof that a 9th grader scoring on a 4 on AP Bio tells me that they don't need it. The problem is with education is exactly what you said. The teachers are the ones that want to hold back and kind of almost create this constraints because, well, that's how they learned. I'm the sage on the stage. I have the information that I can give them to them. But it's very empowering, especially for students when they realize they don't have to be held back. I talk to countless families where, and students that, in their math class or in their science, they got it in the first 5 minutes and now they're bored. And boy, they better not work on something else in their science teacher's class. And then when kids get into trouble here, the beauty of using adaptive software is they can move as quickly as they can when the concepts come easily. And if they find something that's a little more challenging, boom, they can slow down. They're now working at their own pace. And the beauty of Alpha is we then provide an opportunity for the kids to get together to come, whether it's in a cohort-based learning group or a Socratic type discussion. We still do some of the great aspects of education. We just don't require that the only way they can learn information is from a really boring textbook or from a teacher lecturing on and on, where we want them to grab great lectures. There's so many great resources out there. Take what they need and then move forward.
I have more questions about this, but I want to paint the picture of what this looks like in practice first, because I think the day-to-day experience of this is really important. So what does the average day of a student at Alpha High look like? Like how are they using the apps? How do the apps fit into the rest of their day? How does this work?
Oh, that's a great question. So a typical Alpha day is a little over 7 hours. It's a traditional school day, but we break it up a little bit differently. We start every day with some type of opening, whether that's a group or in a small cohort we refer to as houses, and it's where we give our announcements. It's just like a homeroom, but we often do some sort of mental challenge, a question of the day, because we want to spark their learning. But then basically from 9 to 12, that's what we call our core skills time. Students set goals with their guides. They generally do them themselves, and the guides just check them. But if they need a little bit of support, we provide it. But from 9 to 12, there's no bell that rings that says, okay, Hannah, now it's time for go from English to math, and then the bell rings again and we go to science. The students set their own pace. They determine what they're going to work on. We encourage them and we provide incentives for them to use learning science and use things like spaced repetition. So they spend at least 25 to 30 minutes with each of their subjects. But we don't tell them if they're in the flow and they're doing really well in math, they don't have to stop because the bell ring. They can do it, they can continue working and then they can balance it out later. One of the ways that we found to get great productivity out of the students in the mornings is we do Pomodoro sessions. So we set a timer for 30 minutes and they work really focused. They don't have their phones. There's no real distractions. That timer goes off and they have 6 minutes and they can socialize with their friends. They can get a snack and then they can come back. But that gives them 2.5 hours every morning of really focused work. And when they're driven and when they're motivated and they're productive, they can get a full day's worth of work. Now, like any other students, that's not enough to do advanced coursework. Then they have work that they can do at home. We take a break for lunch. Then we come back in the afternoon. In our first hour in the afternoon, we call Learn to Learn. And it's an opportunity for students, if they were struggling and they weren't grasping a concept in their app, that's when they can go out to YouTube, they can go out to Google, they can go out to any other search, fiveable different programs, and they can get more information and try to figure it out. But we also, based on the day, then have these what we call kind of cohort groups or discussion groups where it's based on a topic. So, for example, Mondays is lower classmen English, Tuesdays is social studies, and so we have groups for U.S. history, for world history, geography, and so forth. And that's where they get an opportunity to interact. We do a lot of open-ended questions. We'll do some assessments, make sure that they're gaining true mastery in their apps. And then the last 2 hours of the day, they're spending working on their masterpiece. If they're new to Alpha and they don't know what their masterpiece is, we're taking them through a whole kind of series and seminar on finding what is their passion and what is their purpose in developing and choosing a topic. From there, they're starting to read. And our kids, whatever that topic is, like I said, if it's about education or building a bike park, they're reading, they're consuming information, they're becoming experts in whatever their topic is, and they're also summarizing it, and they're starting to then create their social media presence. So we kind of have them wanting to become an expert and then start to develop a presence on social media where they can put their opinion out and get real world feedback. It's one thing for a faculty member to give a student a grade on a paper. It's something else, as you know, to put out your ideas and thoughts on the internet and open yourself up to all sorts of feedback, many times positive, also many times negative. And they get that real world experience of, is their content any good? Because if nobody reacts to it, tells them really quickly their content's not very good. And then we wrap the day up with a closing exercise, either again in houses or in groups. But they're spending 2 hours a day, at least 10 hours a week at school working on building their masterpiece. And then they're also spending about 15 hours a week on their academics. And on average, an average Alpha kid is doing 1 to 2 hours of homework. But it doesn't mean that it's in that traditional filling out a worksheet, turning it in. They're actively engaging with their software.
So I'm going to share my understanding of what a masterpiece is, and then correct me on pieces that I'm missing, because I want to delve into this too, because this is like probably the most unique part of what you guys do. Believe it or not, because the apps thing is also really unique, but the masterpiece thing is one of the most unique parts of your approach to educating high schoolers. So my understanding is that the masterpiece starts in 9th grade. It's like a 4-year project that every student in high school completes. And they spend their afternoons working on it for all 4 years. And each student chooses a big, audacious goal that's centered around something that they're particularly passionate about, something that they have a level of excitement that can drive them through 4 years of building something. But it's also something that's going to challenge them. And your metric for it is that it has to be an Olympic level project. So it has to be as impressive as being an Olympian. And then they spend 4 years both building like the knowledge framework that they need to build the thing, but also actually building the things, like building a newsletter. Or for your student who's building a bike park, I want to delve into that in a second, because that's such a cool project. Like, he's actually working on making this happen, right? Like, kids are actively, it's not just like sitting down study work. It's like actually doing stuff in the real world, the way most people think that you have to wait until adulthood to do. Is that right? Are there pieces of it that I'm missing?
You nailed it. No, I think you hit it right the nail on the head. These are not ambitious, bold projects for high schoolers. This is to your point, it's Olympic level, and Olympic helps frame it, because when you're an Olympian and you're a 15-year-old Olympic gymnast, you're not the best 15-year-old, you're the best gymnast in the world. So when Rhett wants to build his bike park, he wants to truly build the best bike park in Texas. And then, oh, by the way, once I get those skills, I'm going to go out and I'm going to go after the big parks, like in British Columbia, in Colorado, and so forth. We truly want it to be world class. And unlike other places, we don't believe kids can't do it. We don't say, oh, well, you're in high school. Let's frame that. The best part about Alpha is we rip the constraints off. All the things that normally, whether it's adults or systems or processes that tell kids they can't, we believe that kids can. Ultimately, they are limitless. They are their only limit. And we encourage them to go after it, because when someone really cares, and we've all seen it, when you get super intense and you start to obsess in a positive way about something, it's unbelievable what can be accomplished. And for too long, we were told to sit in rows and listen and not talk and not fidget. And then, okay, when you get out after you go to college, no, we just don't believe in that. We believe that kids can do anything they want to. It's just how hard are they willing to work? What's that capacity for work? Will they grind? Will they do some of the things that are truly unique? And I've got a group of kids that are actually starting to do that. And I can't wait for us to talk about it because people are going to be blown away when they hear what some of these Alpha students are doing.
Let's start with the bike park kid, because this is such a cool project. And I don't know a lot about this one. I haven't heard, I've heard you guys mention it multiple times, but I don't know a lot of detail about this project. Can you walk us through what Rhett's building?
Absolutely. So Rhett fell into mountain biking kind of when COVID hit. He was playing football and some other sports, but he just found that he had this love of mountain biking. And so he became a really great mountain biker. But what he found is there's some really good trails in Texas, but if you really love the sport, it's like skiing. You've got to go where the hills are so that you can go downhill, because Rhett can do things on a bike that most people would never even dream of doing. So then he started saying, well, how can I want to bring a great bike park to Austin. And so, he started learning how to build trails, and Rhett knows more about dirt and the composition of dirt to have to make the appropriate berm. So when it rains, it doesn't wash away, a mixture of clay, and he can go on and on. And he's 16 and he can tell you more about dirt than most geologists. But he started looking for places, and he started first looking for public land, and he talked to the city as a 15, 16-year-old student, didn't have any great results there. Then he thought, well, maybe I can find a private landowner. Didn't kind of struck out there. Well, then all of a sudden he got connected with some adults my age out in Lakeway, and they found a neighborhood that actually had a home association budget for parks and recreation. So Rhett led a pitch with two adults. He was the lead point, put together his slides, did his research, and he pitched them, and he got $6,000 the first day on the spot, and they've committed up to another $60,000. So he now has a plan, and there's a whole group of volunteers, and he's done some small building himself already, but they're going out in their first big effort with a significant number of volunteers, and they are building trails this Saturday. And his goal is to create the initial components of his jump line. Eventually, he'd love to get more funding where he can have extra features put in, get some heavy equipment to move that dirt that he loves so much. And then his big dream is if he could get a rope pull, where basically the rope will help pull you up the hill, because the hardest part of downhill mountain biking is getting up to the top. And so the faster you can do it, the better you can get when you can go down. So Rhett's truly amazing. And he talks about, well, why do you do it, Rhett? He's like, because I'm so hyped for doing it. There's still a 15-year-old kid that talks like a 15-year-old kid, but his passion is contagious. And, when I think about Rhett, or I think about any of these other students at Alpha, I think of that Henry Ford quote, if you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. And instead of everybody constantly telling kids they can't, we are always trying to tell them that they absolutely can, and dream big, go big, do an Olympic level masterpiece.
That's amazing. What is his end goal for graduating high school? Because I know each of your students have, like, part of the project has come up with a one-liner, right? To pitch what they want to have accomplished by the end of their senior year. So what is his?
So we actually reframed that a little bit this year. And so some of our kids have gone from this goal that they want to achieve by the end of high school, and Rhett's a junior, so he's got one more year, to almost like their 10-year plan. What do you see? What do you want to accomplish? Because it helps them really dream bigger. And so for him, right now, he intends to build some of the best trails in Austin, and that will happen by the time he graduates. But his big dream is to build the best mountain bike park in the world. He truly believes that he can do that. And what's gotten him even more excited is as he started his college visits, he went to Stanford, and he's like, oh my gosh, how do I get to Stanford? Because they have two programs around landscape engineering and some other things that would just be great skills to put in his toolkit. But he's like, how do I stand out? Because Rhett has amazing grades. He's got great test scores, but we all know how hard it is to get into Stanford. And he believes that if he can show this entrepreneurial effort, this ability to build a bike park, that will hopefully be the thing that differentiates him in the eyes of the admissions office at Stanford. But that's his dream. He's going to build the best park in the world.
What are some of the other projects that you have students working on right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a young lady that really feels strongly about her faith, but she also loves teen entertainment, whether it's Taylor Swift or the Kardashians. And so her goal, and she reframed her masterpiece from where she first wanted to write papers about theology, and maybe some people would read it, but nobody was really excited. She didn't care that she had an audience. And we pushed her. And that's what part of being at Alpha is that we're going to push you to do the things that you're sort of uncomfortable with. And so her new masterpiece goal is she wants to teach girls the values of the 10 commandments using teenage entertainment. And she is posting on TikTok. She's getting thousands to now, I believe she had one thread that got 600,000 views. She may be up to 1 million. She is actually building a social media presence to the ends that now it's starting to get monetized for her, but it's posts about song lyrics, it's posts about movies, and she is relating her belief in good, strong values, but using it in terms that teenagers can understand. It's really impressive to see what she's doing. And like I said, for her, our biggest challenge is the haters and the real negativity, because it's so easy to get caught up with, you think you have this great idea and now somebody's telling you your idea sucks or it's stupid or it's something, excuse my language, but that's what they're dealing with on a day in, day out basis. I want to give you a few more because there's just so many great things. I have several young men that just love gaming. And so I have one young man that wants to kind of blow up the traditional gaming, and he wants to help spark the rise of what he calls indie game development. And I have a ninth grader that's big time into gaming, has been posting on Twitter, and now announced to everybody yesterday, the second independent studio is following me. And it's like so cool to see, a 14-year-old young man that is like pumped up, and now a studio is following him. One of our students, and I think you're familiar with, Austin Scholar, has this incredible Substack newsletter where weekly she's writing to moms, basically, that's her target audience, and talking about education and the fact that she's not had an actual teacher since fourth grade, but yet her goal is to go to Oxford. She'd love to write poetry someday, but she's been doing AP Calculus BC, AP Physics, AP Lang, and having this incredible academic resume. Now she's really doing things on the non-academic side, and she doesn't miss a deadline. Every Sunday, her newsletter is out there. I don't know many adults that could be on that pace that Austin Scholar is, and the topics and the way that she writes, it's the reader is drawn in. We had an experience where she wrote about how to prepare for the PSAT. And I know she got feedback from people that said, I looked at the 10 best articles at Google and your article was better. So we're having those experiences with students. I have another young man that loves animation and has a real kind of comedic sense. He's trying to build his own animated TV show. We have another young lady that wants to sort of figure out how to cure cancer with the connection between food and epigenetics. And so she's out on Twitter challenging physicians and using her own sport, a spiky point of view, to establish these new connections and to really start to become familiar with the research. And then the last example I'll give, and I know that you met this young woman before, is I've got a student that wants to sort of create this metaverse community where she can teach life skills to 2 million or 10 million kids. And it's really impressive. And she just exudes that confidence and that desire to help others learn life skills and build great communication skills. And again, for her, she has an amazing internship with an organization called Ever Scouts that's reimagining scouting for the 21st century. But she's like, you know what? I want to go bigger than that. And great, go for it. Go big.
I feel like you have maybe as good a window as anyone does, if not one of the best, into just how much kids and especially teenagers are capable of, and just how much we stifle that potential with the requirements and the inefficiencies of traditional schooling. And the model that you guys are running just completely blows that wide open. Kids are getting things done incredibly efficiently with all of the things that they have to do. They're not doing them. They're just doing them really quickly. And then they're working on these really amazing things. When you talk to students about these projects that they want to work on, do you feel like they have an innate sense of how much they're capable of? How much are you guys pushing and challenging them to see that capability versus how much of it do you feel like they naturally have? And also, because you guys also get kids that transfer into Alpha from more traditional education models. Do those kids need more pushing to realize what they're capable of? Like, do you feel like the kids coming in from traditional school have a harder time transitioning into this self-directed, I'm going to go take on the whole world sort of mentality than the kids that have been in it since they were little?
Absolutely. And I'm going to qualify my answer, Hannah, first by saying at Alpha, we realize that the Alpha model is not a one size fits all model. We don't believe that every student can thrive in this environment. It's for the right student. Number two, as much as we can talk about the things that we dislike, and I agree with you, there is too much stifling of students in traditional education. Traditional education works for some kids. I have two boys, and my oldest walked through Alpha prior to me joining Alpha a couple of years ago. And he walked in and he looked at me in 3 minutes. He said, I would never come here. So we realize that it's not for everybody, because the profile of a great Alpha student is someone that is self-directed, does want more control over their say in their education, and they want to build a program. No different than not every student wants to go to Brown University where you design your own program. Other people are much more comfortable when I go into my track and I have to choose 3 courses out of this group and 4 courses out of this group. There's a lot of responsibility. It's hard to be an Alpha student in many ways. But for that student that wants to think differently, that doesn't thrive sitting in a desk, listening to the sage on the stage lecture on, we can be an amazing fit for some of those students. And yes, often the kids that it depends on how long and how old they are, and then how long. If they've been in the Alpha model for a while, they've been taught that they can kind of do anything, and they've got sort of that freedom to explore and see what their passions are. And along the way, they're learning life skills. They're great at giving and receiving feedback, etc. We can talk about our life skill stack. But also, you also see kids when they come through Alpha, if they're transitioning from other schools, and when they walk in, they're like, oh my God, you can see they already sort of feel like home. And they're like, oh my goodness, this is interesting. I had a student today, and when she saw a video that we created on the masterpieces, she's like, I want to do that. So certain students are drawn here. And I think at the end of the day, we do have to oftentimes nudge people. With the masterpieces, we have students that are natural creators, but sometimes those creative types don't want to put themselves out there and get feedback. So what we do in the 2 hours that we're here is we try to push them to do the things that they're least comfortable with. Because I know Austin Scholar will write all the time, but will they want to reach out and ask someone to DM them and to make those connections? Those are hard, whether you're an adult or you're at 15 or 16 years old. So we try to encourage students to do the things that they're sort of uncomfortable in an environment where they're completely comfortable with us, and they have this huge support system of peers and guides that will encourage them along. So to answer your question, yes, I think unfortunately too often kids are stifled and constraints are put on them. Our job is to break those constraints and really encourage them and get them to believe, because once they believe that they can do it, they get the courage and the confidence that they can do it.
You guys are kind of like a solopreneur accelerator for teenagers. Like you're kind of,
Yeah.
it feels like the way you described, like it's almost set up like a WeWork, and it is set up like a WeWork, and it's very self-directed, and all these kids are setting up these projects. It's kind of like you're running this really intensive and broad-reaching acceleration program to help kids like land on the things they're really excited about, and then just like giving them all the resources that they need to go all in, which is a very cool thing to be doing. And it sounds like pushing kids to build personal brands is a really important piece of this whole masterpiece thing. As you've mentioned in a couple of different occasions, like the girl who's doing the TikToks about values. Originally, she was interested in writing theological papers, which also, like to the right observer, is also an impressive thing for a teenager to have done. So, what is the sort of like? How are you helping your students frame what is a more and less valuable project? Is it based on real world impact? Is it based on reach? Is it based on some other metric? Like what makes a good project in the eyes of Alpha versus something that maybe they could push harder, even though a handful of people would think it was really impressive?
That's a great question, and there's a couple of components to the answer, I think. So first and foremost, it's you said like a solopreneur, so but it's ultimately whatever they're passionate about. Sometimes it might be around a business, sometimes it could be monetization, but other times it doesn't have to be. So it's really, they have sort of the full spectrum to choose from whatever it is that excites them, because at the end of the day, that's what we care about most. Is we do want them to become an expert in their topic, so much so that they could, if they wanted to learn about finance, we would want them to be so solid that they could kind of watch a news show and see what somebody would answer, and they'd be like, they could give sort of that answer, for example. We also want them to get the real world feedback. Again, it's one thing to get a grade from a teacher, it's another thing to get feedback from experts. And by setting really bold and ambitious goals, Olympic level, our experience is successful people in their careers will absolutely stop and help teenagers, and they will give them advice and they will support them if they believe that they're doing something extraordinary. Those folks that are successful don't have an endless amount of time that they can give to young people unless it's such a passion for them. But they will certainly give up their valuable time for someone that they believe is wanting to do something that's truly meaningful, that is going to make an impact. And so we help them frame those big goals. And sometimes it's around making $1 million or the best in the world. We try to frame it so that if somebody looks at that goal, they're like, wow, yeah, that is as impressive as being an Olympic track sprinter or whatever, put insert athlete or insert Olympian. Because in that step, then by helping them set up that great big goal, they're then putting themselves in position to, once they get the expertise, then we want them getting out there and starting to develop their own sort of spiky point of view. What do they believe? Because they have enough knowledge now that their opinion matters, and they have enough expertise. And so now they can start to engage with experts. And then from kind of year 3 of the project is when we hope that they start to, we call it unleash, or they start to execute and really start to deliver. And everybody's going to be working on a different format on the timeline. Some kids, like in Rhett's example, he started building trails from the get-go. He doesn't get his park until it's all finished. But building his park is just as important in starting the trail building process, or the writing process, or the TikTok filming and getting better at TikTok. And how do you create, compelling videos is part of the journey. And that to us is, at the end of the day, we don't care whether they ultimately achieve that Olympic one-liner goal. What we want them to do is realize what they gain by becoming this, that they now can write in very clear, concise language. They can create a great hook that will draw a reader in when they're trying to create their posts, that they have this deep level of expertise. So when they do their college admissions interview and the instructor or the interviewer asks them, well, what are you passionate about? What do you care about? And they're like, oh my goodness, can I show you this portfolio? Or can I talk to you about this deep knowledge that is not, well, I started a club, or I did this, or I was the president of something. And there's nothing wrong with that. But I think our kids, we want them functioning on a different level.
And correct me if I'm wrong, but it feels like the ideal outcome for your kids when they graduate from their 4 years at Alpha High is for them to be able to get into whatever high level school they want to get into. Like Rhett's really excited about Stanford, Austin Scholar's really excited about Oxford, and you're 100% have them on a path to be able to get there. And the project fits into that vision, where like it is a thing in their portfolio that will make them stand out. But you also have this high level of emphasis on academic excellence. They're getting 4s and 5s on AP exams. So you want them to be positioned to get into a high level school if they want to, but that's not necessarily the only outcome that they might be working towards, and that you're supporting them in. Like they might want to leave Alpha at the end of their 4 years and go straight into building a business, or try to pursue something like a Teal Fellowship, or funding from 1517 or something like that, which is another fund that invests in teenagers building really cool things. Or they might want to go do something else entirely. what, like, one, is that understanding correct? Like, is that what you guys are working towards and how you're framing it to the kids, or is there nuance here that I'm missing? And like, how do you define like what doors you want to be open to them by the end of this 4-year process?
That's the key. We want as many open doors to them as possible. Nothing would make us happier than in the next few years we had a student that received a teal fellowship. I mean, I think that would be a great way that we would define success. We're also going to define success by, can the students get into their first choice institution? And you know what? Every Alpha student may not be an Ivy League or Stanford or Duke. It's wherever they go because it's the right program for them. But more importantly, if they believe that a gap year, or they want to go out and do some kind of service project, or they want to start their own business, really what we want to do is put them in position to achieve that goal and live the dream. But no matter what, if I had a student right now and I have a sophomore that tells me every day that she's not going to college, I said, great, I want that for you. But you know what? We're still going to put you on this academic plan that when you change your mind, or if you change your mind in junior or senior year, you aren't stuck where you can't go. You're still just as competitive for the top 20 schools versus if you are lucky enough that you can go start your career. So for us, you hit the nail on the head. We want options for our students. We never want to close doors. We want to keep them open as much as possible. Well, I think the vast majority of our students will go to great schools, but there will be some that won't.
I feel like you've been thinking about how to educate teenagers from a very different angle, like almost coming at it from the complete opposite direction as like the average person, just kind of assuming, well, this is how high school works, so this is how we're supposed to educate teenagers, right? This is kind of a high level philosophical question, but what are some of the things that you think are just sort of standard, out of the box, we don't really think too hard about this, it's just the way we've always done it, so it's how you're supposed to do it, right? Education approach to teenagers gets wrong? Because what you guys are doing, like, you've reinvented in a lot of ways, a lot of, or kind of, maybe reinvented isn't quite the right word, but you certainly dismantled a lot of the assumptions around how high school needs to work, and your kids are thriving. So it's clearly working. What are some of your biggest criticisms of the status quo high school approach?
We talked about it a little bit before. Probably my biggest criticism is stifling. I am really, and having been in education for so long, kind of the tracking of kids or telling students that you have to hit certain criteria in order to be eligible to take an honors class or an AP class. Students develop at different ages, and you know what, it's frustrating to me when students are defined in a certain way or put in a box, and it's just so limiting. And I think it comes from the belief and that I don't think you come to Alpha as a guide or as any type of a staff member if you don't believe in the concept that truly kids are limitless and teenagers are limitless and high school students are limitless. They can do what they want. And if you don't agree to that, then you really shouldn't be here, because we do want to kind of dismantle traditional education. My previous school, we worked with really high level athletes, and too often I found kids that had been pushed through a system because they were so incredibly talented on the field that we had to almost help them reprogram that they were capable of being students. And on any given Saturday or Sunday, I can look at a college football game, a college basketball game, and say, not only did that kid go to my previous school, but I knew him and I worked with him, and I can say what a great kid it was. But what makes me really happy, and what a lot of us on the academic side made us happy, was when we found out that somebody that was never told they could be a great student made Dean's List, a quarterback at FSU that was on Academic Warrior. I can give you so many stories, basketball player. That to me, when they realized that they could be more than just an athlete, and that defining them as just that one thing is the thing that's my biggest criticism of education. So for me at Alpha, it's how can we allow them to be what they want and pursue the things that they want at the depth that they want, but then also do this project. So you don't have to there's no one size fits all for what our students look like, but we certainly don't want one dimensional masterpieces without great academics. We want to show that they can be very much complete young people. They can carry on an amazing conversation. Our students would do a far better job than me on your podcast. They can communicate with adults. They can articulate their thoughts and ideas. They can get a 5 on an AP. And oh, by the way, they can do these incredible things. And because they've always been encouraged to do what they can. And even if we're thought, oh boy, that's going to be tough, we're like, okay, let's figure it out. And the beauty of Alpha is we realize we're not experts in writing a Substack. We're not experts in building mountain bike parks. We don't need to be. We're just there to help guide them and motivate them. And because they can find all the resources that they need. And that to me is what's great about Alpha. Again, we're not for everybody, but what's great about Alpha is you can do what you want and you can follow your own path, and nobody's going to say, well, there's no one to be your faculty advisor for that, so you can't pursue that project. No, you can be your own advisor, and you can find them on the internet, and you can reach out to them on Twitter or on Instagram and get the best in the world to give you feedback and give you information.
I want to talk a little bit about your past experience at IMG because one, there's a lot of athletic metaphors that underpin a lot of how you talk about Alpha, not just the Olympians thing, although that's the obvious one, but there's a lot of parallels between great athletics and great academics in the way that you guys frame what you're doing. But I feel like you also bring some really unique insights to the world of high school education and high school projects from working with great athletes at IMG, but I'm guessing that a lot of our listeners have never heard of IMG before. So let's start there. What is this school that you worked at prior to coming to Alpha?
Great. So IMG Academy is the largest boarding school in the United States, and it's for kids that are passionate about sport. And you could train in 8 different sports. It started as the Nick Bollettieri Tennis Academy in the 80s, and there were great tennis players that were there. And then they added soccer and baseball, and then they added basketball, lacrosse, track and field, football. And so I believe they're going to add volleyball next and so forth. So basically the way it's set up is very similar to Alpha in that students went to school for half a day. They either went to school in the morning and trained in the afternoon, or they went to school, or they trained in the morning and went to school in the afternoon. But it was roughly about a 4-hour day. And what was amazing about the academy is we had students from all 50 states and generally on anywhere from 80 to 90 countries and probably over 200 countries represented. So we were bringing students in from all sorts of different educational systems and figuring out a way to, number one, help them to graduate, and also, most importantly, be eligible to compete in NCAA athletics, whether it's Division I, Division II, Division III. And so what was really important for us was, obviously, I wanted the best quality faculty we could have there. But beyond that, for me, it was about relationship building. I needed those teachers to buy what we were selling, which we were a school for athletes. And the knock on the academy for so long was that it was just a jock factory and we were a diploma mill and there wasn't serious. That rubbed a lot of us the wrong way. And I was fortunate to be there for 17 years, but there were so many great educators and people there that really believed that, again, like I said before, that they were more than just athletes. They were student athletes, and we took that really seriously. And so, we made an effort to make sure that we understood each kid. We were really trying to help support them as learners. We found that about 25% of student athletes had a diagnosed learning difference. We often got students tested and paid for them that would have just been pushed through and never got and once they got maybe a little extended time, or they realized that they learned differently, or there was some dyslexia and we could give them that support, all of a sudden you saw their grades blossom. So Alpha is certainly the next level because we're now going beyond the limitations of a traditional classroom and using the software and using resources. But I have this background that tells me I know what teenagers are capable of because we had kids that went right from high school to the pros, or they went and played elite Division I athletics, and how they had to manage their time, how they had to really be able to take this passion that they had in sport, but then truly be ready to qualify and be a student athlete. And oh, by the way, still be a teenager and have fun and have some of those traditional high school experiences along the way. So I think without really understanding it, it set me up well for making the transition to Alpha. And since I've been here, I've just been on this journey of knowledge and really having to learn about learning strategies and learning science and start to learn apps and what apps are effective and how can I really realize that I won't know it all, but I've got the best product testers in the world right there that can give us feedback about what do they like about this app, what do they don't, how can we change it up. And that's the exciting part, is that I can take that experience from working with student athletes. And then to your point, also, we try to coach our alpha students in some ways like athletes. And some of our best guides came from a great coaching background, because in athletics, you deal with adversity. You deal with the challenges of, often you were the big fish in your small pond, and now you came to IMG, and now you're not the best athlete on the team anymore. And how do you deal with that? Same sort of thing here. What if a great writer came in? That's going to only help Austin Scholar become a better writer, or the young lady to make better TikTok. So we want to keep bringing in really talented, motivating kids so that we can keep pushing them further, or each other will drive them further, because a healthy sense of competition, but yeah, competition. People who doesn't want to try to measure themselves and beat the best. And if you don't, then this isn't the right environment. But for those kids that want to push themselves further, and this is the absolute right way. And the way that we can do that is with coaching strategy, with motivation, using positive psychology, and really helping them take some of the best principles of athletics and apply it to their masterpiece and to their academics.
I find the athletic world so interesting as a case study too, for what kids are capable of, especially in high school, not just in terms of real world accomplishment on the field or the court, or whatever their sport is.
Mm-hmm.
Like your point earlier about the Olympic gymnast isn't just the best 15-year-old, she's the best gymnast in the entire world.
Yeah.
But it's also such an interesting testament to how much kids can get done academically when they're not wasting their time, when they're being efficient with their time. Because these kids especially kids that are playing Division I sports in college, they still need to get a high school education. They still need to have academics that can take them to college, even if they're,
Mm-hmm.
being recruited to play on a sports team. And they don't have hours upon hours every day to be spending in class and then doing homework and going through all of the very inefficient channels that most kids go through, because they also have to have a lot of time practicing at an elite level and making sure that they're training both their sports skills, but also their physical bodies, to make sure that they're ready to play their game of choice. And these kids thrive. And we kind of forget about that when we think about teenagers working, or teenagers building entrepreneurial projects, starting a business, becoming writers. I don't think we draw that connection very well to, like, look over here. We actually have a whole subset of our students that are doing this already, and they're thriving. So I'd love to hear you talk more about the approach that you took at IMG because you said it was like 4 hours a day of academics, right? So how are you guys getting a full high school experience that efficiently? Because if I understand correctly, it's not like you guys were just sort of like, yeah, do bare minimum, whatever, just get out on the field.
Mm-mm.
Like, you guys had academic standards. So how were you doing that so efficiently? What was the approach there?
It's a great question. And it was a couple of different ways. We were constantly tweaking our schedule to figure out how could we help them be as efficient and as effective as possible, including, and the biggest challenge for us was, how could we make sure they got enough sleep? Because that was one of the biggest components of being a successful, not only student athlete and an athlete, but also the research is there for our alpha kids, that if they're not sleeping properly, that's when your body really retains that information, and the learning goes. So it was that the schedule was such that we made the most of it. We hit all of the standards, certain number of days in the classroom, certain number of hours. But what we realized over the way as we got better is we started to take out the non-essential stuff. We actually had a previous academic leader that insisted on it. It had to be 30 minutes of homework per class per day. And it got to the point where they were just doing busy work. And we said, you know what? How can we eliminate the busy work? And when it's important, by all means, we're going to do homework. You can't learn math without doing some problems and things. But did you have to do 60 problems a night? No. We started to figure out what was the right amount of homework to give students? How could we make sure that it was really application of the concepts that they learned in class? So instead of just doing mindless worksheets, we tried to move into open-ended questions, thought-provoking questions, things that really sort of tied their learning together. We also had a what I think was effective evening study program, because we needed to give them an opportunity. On average, an IMG kid missed somewhere between 2 and 8 weeks of instruction because they were out traveling and competing. And we still had kids that were scoring well on APs. Not quite as well as the Alpha kids, but pretty impressive when you think about that they were missing somewhere between 2 and 8 weeks of school. So we had a program. The faculty didn't love it always, but we had from 7:30 to 9, you came back in and you could get help. And often when I was the dean of students there at first, if a kid was struggling in chemistry, they might go to their chemistry teacher, but I often encourage them to go to a different teacher because they might use an example differently. They might use a term differently. So we tried to maximize that time. And I think we weren't as tied into, and I wish we were, and I think that's where they can get better, to the way that the resources that are out there in the apps, in YouTube, in Google, and so forth, to where you can find any of those things. And some of the kids were starting to be able to figure that out. But I think that's where we've really hit the ability to be 2x learners, to learn twice as fast, to be more efficient and productive, because we want them to unlock time to work on their masterpieces, just like the kids were on the fields for 3-4 hours practicing and traveling and so forth. So I think what we tried to do at the Academy was, number one, be efficient, teach kids time management skills, teach them how to really maximize their time. And we also tried very hard not to waste their time and to have them doing things that weren't really valuable. And so the classroom environment changed. It got to be one that was much more dynamic. We changed the furniture so that we didn't have to do rows. We could move in little things, but it started to make a big difference. And again, we had some amazing student athletes that were able to go beyond their sport and leverage their sport to get into schools like Ivies, like service academies, like Duke and Stanford, and the other top schools that they wouldn't have had that opportunity if it wasn't for their athletic background.
I think that one of the things that interests me so much about both IMG and Alpha is that you guys are setting a very different end result that causes you to rethink some of the first principles around how you're approaching a kid's education. That if you're just operating on the assumption that you have 7 hours a day of class time, and in that 7 hours, you just have to cover your Common Core requirements. Like, there's a level of thinking that doesn't have to happen when that's the base assumption. Mm-hmm. But when you change it and you say, no, actually the measure of outcome is that my kid has a time to build an Olympic level project, or my kid has to have time to be, like playing at a level that's getting them recruited by a Division I school. That's a very different come from that reshapes a lot of these premises that a lot of people just assume are the way you need to do things for high school. And so I think that's really interesting. You alluded earlier, though, to some of these students that you worked with at IMG who hadn't realized they could be good at academics. And I'd love to hear you share more about that. Like, maybe if there's a story or two or something that you can share. But I think that's really, I think there probably are a lot of kids out there who could thrive in systems like this and they just don't know it.
Right. Yeah, I'd be happy to. But one of the things that you made me think about was, there's a lot of great independent schools that in some ways define rigor by how much homework they give. And I think that's the biggest waste of a young person's time. I'm not saying that there shouldn't be homework. I'm not saying that they, like I said, they can't do math. They shouldn't be reading novels. Absolutely. There's quality work to be done. But this idea that you have to do 4 hours a night, what a waste, versus if you can be in a play, if you can be on an athletic team, if you can build a masterpiece. To me, that's where you're creating this far better young person that's ready to go on and tackle the world than just having them grinding over and over again on homework. To the IMG piece, one of my favorite moments that I can think of is, a year or two after we added football, and football changed the academy in many different ways. It brought it on more of the national stage because, like it or not, the United States just loves football. Whether it's Friday Night Lights in Texas or the NFL on Sundays, college football on Saturday, people love football. So one day I got a call from my math chair who was teaching geometry at the time, and she brought me down to meet with a student named Curtis. And she said, Mr. Locke, Curtis has some news to you. And he goes, Mr. Locke, we just took a test. I got a 79. And I was like, yes. And he high-fived me, and then he picked me up because he was a lineman. And I thought he was going to break me in half. But Curtis had never really had, for him, that 79, that C plus was a huge win because he had always just got by just enough because he was pushed through. And Karen said, no, we're going to learn this subject and you can do it. And then it became, I stayed in touch. And then that 79 became an 85, became a 91. And by the end of his career here, he was making A's and B's in all of his classes because it came back to he finally believed that he was capable of doing it because nobody told him that he could. They just told him, oh, well, you know what? You're a big guy. You're going to be a football player. Or you're going to dunk a basketball or you're going to do something like that. And that's the thing that I'm most proud of. And it started before I got there was that we were never going to only define students at the academy as athletes. We took seriously the term student athletes. And more importantly, we wanted to also have them be young men and women of character too. And we didn't call it life skills, but we had programs for them and we had service projects because what a special opportunity to be able to spend 4 hours a day, 5 to 6, 7 days a week on a tennis court or on a soccer field or in a basketball gym. And they became some of the best mentors. We had an amazing relationship with the local Boys and Girls Club. And those kids lit up when the IMG kids came by because they got to see people that could be their heroes. And so for me, it's always been important to really help kids realize that they can truly do anything they want to. And it's not like rose-colored glasses and you can't. A lot of hard work goes through it. And it's how much do you want it? But we never told them that they couldn't. And we certainly never tell the alpha kids that they can't. When it's big and it's super big, we're like, okay, how are you going to do that? And you know what? They have a plan and they can figure it out and they can really work through the steps and achieve some of those great goals.
I think that's such an important point that you just made, that kids need to believe that they can do this stuff. And I don't think it just applies to academic performance. It applies to the projects too. And it applies
Absolutely.
to the going out in the real world and feeling like you can go message somebody on Twitter who's an expert in the field that you want to be an expert in someday, and to feel like you actually have something useful to say, or you have a question that's worth asking. And there's a chance that they might actually take the time to pay attention to that. I think a lot of kids never get told that they can do that. And I think that's part of what's so powerful about what you're doing, is that you're telling kids that they can do that on a daily basis. And you're also challenging them to do that. When they come to you with an idea, you're kind of coming back with a yes, and like, yes, and what if you
Yes.
also like reach out to somebody about that and pushed a little harder and saw what might move over here if you put your focus and your energy there. And I feel like it's probably very rewarding to watch the shift in your students too over the course of the 4 years, not just on the academic side, but on the project side too, when they start to realize, wait a second, I can have this crazy idea and I can also do something with it too. I imagine that's really exciting and meaningful to get to see that development occur.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I could boil it down in another way is high standards. Kids respond to the expectations or what you want to put to them. If you have really high standards, they will strive to meet those standards. Or you can say, you know what, you're not really capable of doing anything. And guess what? 9 times out of 10, a lot of kids will go, yeah, I won't do it. But that same 9 out of 10 kids, if you say, no, you're going to do this and you set that standard really high, they will work hard to achieve whatever it is expected. And to me, it's the biggest travesty in the current state of our education is that we're constantly teaching to the lowest common denominator, not kids, but the lowest level of standards where they're capable of so much more. And instead of saying they can't do it, let's put our heads together and figure out how they can do it.
That's very exciting. I'm really excited to see how the future of alpha unfolds, especially as you have some of these kids that are wrapping up masterpieces and you have the case studies of like what a 4-year alpha experience can look like. You guys are going to have a lot of really exciting things to be sharing with the world about what teens are capable of. This has been such a great conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time, Chris.